Did you know a single tornado in Missouri killed more people than any storm in U.S. history? Or that a heat wave in California once turned grapes into raisins on the vine before anyone could harvest them? How about the fact that a blizzard in New York once buried the city so deep, people tunneled through snow just to find the streets? Every state in America has been hit by something that shouldn't have been possible. Some of it is science, some of it is tragedy, and some of it is genuinely terrifying. Today, we're breaking down the most extreme weather ever recorded in every U.S. state, all 50 of them, and what we found will completely change the way you look at the sky above your head. Let's get into it. Alabama, the super outbreak. April 27, 2011. In a single afternoon, 62 tornadoes ripped across Alabama simultaneously. The Hackleburg Phil Campbell tornado alone was on the ground for 132 miles, nearly the width of the state. Wind speeds hit 210 miles per hour. Entire towns were erased in seconds. 238 Alabamians died that day, the deadliest tornado event in state history. Doppler radar was overwhelmed. Meteorologists describing storms they had never seen before in real time. Survivors described hearing a sound like the earth itself cracking open. Alabama's worst afternoon lasted less than 6 hours. Alaska, the perfect storm. November 1978. The Bering Sea storm of 1978 produced waves over 50 feet and wind gusts exceeding 139 miles per hour off Alaska's coast. But Alaska's true weather extreme happened on land. On January 23, 1971, Prospect Creek recorded minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest temperature ever measured in U.S. history. That's cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under a minute. Cold enough that diesel fuel gels solid. Cold enough that the moisture in your breath freezes before it leaves your mouth. Alaska doesn't get cold. It gets dangerous. Arizona, the haboob that swallowed Phoenix. July 5th, 2011. A wall of dust 1 mile high and 100 miles wide rolled across the Sonoran Desert and swallowed Phoenix whole in under an hour. Visibility dropped to zero. Flights grounded. Highways became parking lots. The haboob was so massive it was visible from space. But Arizona's all-time heat extreme belongs to Lake Havasu City. On June 29, 1994, it hit 128 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to fry an egg on asphalt in 4 minutes. Hot enough that road signs warped. Hot enough that the state's own records struggled to be believed. In Arizona, the sky attacks from every angle. Arkansas, the schoolhouse blizzard of 1918. Arkansas doesn't do winter gently. On January 10, 1918, temperatures across the state plunged 66 degrees in 24 hours. What started as a mild morning turned into sub-zero carnage by nightfall. Livestock froze standing up. Rivers locked solid in hours. The temperature drop remains one of the fastest ever recorded in the continental U.S. But the state's record low, minus 29 degrees Fahrenheit at Pond, set in 1905, was so extreme it stood unbroken for over a century. In Arkansas, the temperature doesn't change, it collapses. California, Death Valley, July 10, 1913. 134 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest air temperature ever measured on the surface of the Earth. Recorded at Furnace Creek in Death Valley, on an afternoon that should have been physically impossible. The ground temperature that day likely exceeded 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Metal tools were reported too hot to touch. The reading almost wasn't believed. Meteorologists debated it for decades. In 2021, a review committee confirmed it. Death Valley in 1913 was hotter than any weather station on the planet has ever recorded, before or since. California has the coldest mountains, the wettest coast, and the hottest spot on Earth. All in the same state. Colorado, the blizzard of 2003. In March 2003, a single storm dropped 31.5 inches of snow on Denver in 24 hours. The city shut down completely. I-70 closed for 200 miles. National Guard deployed on snowmobiles to rescue stranded motorists. But Colorado's real weather extremes happen fast. On January 12, 1888, the children's blizzard swept through with no warning, temperatures dropping 50 degrees in minutes. Kids walked out of schoolhouses into clear skies and were found frozen in fields hours later. Colorado weather doesn't build. It ambushes. Connecticut, the New England hurricane. September 21st, 1938. Nobody saw it coming. The Great New England Hurricane of 1938 made landfall with virtually no warning, a product of an era before modern tracking. It hit Connecticut as a Category 3, pushing a 17-foot storm surge inland. Entire beachside communities vanished in under 2 hours. Wind gusts hit 186 miles per hour at Blue Hill, Massachusetts, just across the state line. Connecticut lost 85 lives and 8,900 homes. The storm moved so fast, 70 miles per hour forward speed, that meteorologists couldn't outrun it with telegrams. The state had never seen a hurricane. It never forgot this one. Delaware, the flash freeze of 1994. Delaware is small, flat, and largely defenseless against the atmosphere. On January 19, 1994, wind chills plunged to minus 55 degrees Fahrenheit statewide. Pipes burst in tens of thousands of homes simultaneously. Schools closed, roads iced over in minutes. Delaware's geography offers zero shelter from Arctic blasts that barrel down the eastern seaboard. The state record low stands at minus 17 degrees Fahrenheit, recorded at Millsboro in 1893. For a state with no mountains, no valleys, nowhere to hide, every winter storm arrives at full speed. Florida, Hurricane Michael, October 10th, 2018. Michael made landfall near Mexico Beach as a Category 5, with 160 miles per hour sustained winds, the strongest storm to ever hit the Florida Panhandle. What took decades to build was gone in 4 minutes. Entire neighborhoods were flattened to bare concrete slabs, the foundations the only evidence homes ever existed. The pressure at landfall was 919 millibars, the third lowest ever recorded at U.S. landfall. Survivors described the eye wall arriving as a sudden, total, absolute silence, before the rear wall hit harder than anything before it. Florida's worst storm wasn't the one that soaked it, it was the one that deleted it. Georgia? Snowmageddon. January 28, 2014. 2 inches of snow paralyzed Atlanta for 3 days. Not 2 feet. 2 inches. Thousands of commuters abandoned their cars on interstates and slept in them overnight. Children were stranded on school buses. The National Guard rescued people from frozen overpasses. The storm exposed every flaw in a major American city's infrastructure simultaneously. But Georgia's true weather extreme belongs to its heat. On August 20th, 1983, Louisville hit 112 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature so out of place for the Deep South that the thermometer was checked 3 times before the reading was accepted. In Georgia, 2 inches of snow is more dangerous than 112 degrees. Hawaii, Hurricane Iniki, September 11th, 1992. Hawaii gets hit by hurricanes so rarely that residents stop preparing. Iniki reminded them why they shouldn't. It made landfall on Kauai as a Category 4, the most powerful hurricane to strike Hawaii in recorded history. Sustained winds of 145 miles per hour, gusts of 160, a storm surge that swept oceanfront homes off their foundations. 5,000 homes destroyed. $1.8 billion in damage. The island of Kauai took over a decade to fully recover. The morning of September 11th, Spielberg was on the island filming Jurassic Park. He sheltered 150 cast and crew in a hotel ballroom. The storm had more impact than any special effect he'd ever created. Idaho. The Moscow Mountain Blizzard. January 1969. Northern Idaho received 98 inches of snow in a single week in January 1969. Roofs collapsed. Roads ceased to exist. Communities were cut off for weeks. But Idaho's most extreme single event was the freeze of February 1933, when Orofino recorded minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature so severe that metal became brittle and shattered on impact. Loggers abandoned entire work sites. Animals that had survived Idaho winters for generations didn't survive that one. In Idaho, the mountains don't just block the weather, they concentrate it. Illinois. The heat wave of 1995. In 5 days in July 1995, Chicago killed 739 people. Not a tornado, not a flood. Heat. The temperature hit 106 degrees Fahrenheit, but the heat index reached 126 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was so thick with humidity it felt like breathing through a warm towel. The city ran out of morgue space and used refrigerator trucks for overflow. Low-income neighborhoods without air conditioning bore the catastrophic weight. Elderly residents who kept windows closed for fear of crime were found days later. Chicago's deadliest disaster wasn't a storm. It was a summer. A quiet, brutal, invisible summer. Indiana. The Tri-State Tornado. March 18, 1925. The Tri-State Tornado holds the records that matter most. 219 miles on the ground, 3.5 hours of continuous destruction, 695 lives taken. It crossed Indiana like a freight train with no brakes, at 73 miles per hour forward speed, faster than almost any documented tornado. Towns like Griffin and Owensville were obliterated before residents even heard it coming. There were no sirens, no radar, no warning systems. People looked up and saw a cloud the color of black ink, moving faster than they could run. Indiana was the middle of the most destructive tornado track in American history. Iowa, the derecho, August 10, 2020. A derecho is a wall of thunderstorms that moves like a hurricane on land. On August 10, 2020, one with winds of 140 miles per hour hit Iowa at breakfast time with almost no warning. It destroyed 10 million acres of crops. Entire grain storage facilities collapsed. Power lines snapped across the state. The damage exceeded $11 billion, making it one of the costliest weather disasters in U.S. history. Nobody outside Iowa heard much about it. No ocean, no coast, no dramatic footage of waves. Just a flat state of farmers watching a year's work disappear in 40 minutes. Kansas, the Dodge City Tornado Corridor. Kansas holds the record for the most tornadoes per square mile of any state on Earth. The Codell area has been struck by a tornado on the same date, May 20th, 3 consecutive years in a row. The Great Bend tornado of 1915 picked up an entire Santa Fe Railroad boxcar and deposited it a quarter-mile away. But the most extreme single day was May 3rd, 1999, when the Bridge Creek Moore tornado generated winds of 301 miles per hour, the highest surface wind speed ever recorded on Earth. A portable Doppler unit measured it. The instrument was nearly destroyed in the process. Kansas doesn't sit in Tornado Alley. It is Tornado Alley. Kentucky, the ice storm of 2009. In January 2009, a single ice storm knocked out power to 769,000 Kentucky homes. Not snow, ice. Trees and power lines collapsed under the weight. Some rural communities went without electricity for 3 weeks in sub-zero temperatures. The National Guard conducted welfare checks by snowmobile. FEMA called it one of the worst natural disasters in state history. Kentucky's ice storms are so destructive because the state sits in a climate zone where warm Gulf air meets Arctic cold, directly. No transition. No gradual buildup. Just a perfect collision that coats everything in an inch of glass. Louisiana. Hurricane Katrina. August 29th, 2005. The numbers are almost too large to process. 1,833 deaths. 80% of New Orleans flooded. $125 billion in damage. Storm surge of 28 feet. A Category 3 at landfall that hit a city sitting below sea level. The 17th Street Canal levee didn't fail during the storm. It failed hours later when the surge arrived. A catastrophic engineering failure that turned a hurricane into a slow-motion drowning of an American city. Survivors on rooftops waited days. The Superdome held 30,000 people with no power and no sanitation. Louisiana's worst storm was as much a failure of infrastructure as it was of nature. Maine. The ice storm of 1998. The ice storm of 1998 blanketed Maine in 3 inches of ice in under 24 hours. 3 inches doesn't sound like much until you calculate the weight on every tree and power line in the state. Ancient maples that had survived 2 centuries of Maine winters split at the trunk. The power outage lasted 3 weeks for some communities. Dairy farmers lost entire herds when milking systems failed. The storm cost $1.4 billion and affected 500,000 people. Maine's identity is built around surviving brutal winters. The ice storm of 1998 was the one winter Maine didn't survive gracefully. Maryland. The blizzard of 1996. In January 1996, 2 storms hit Maryland in 11 days, collectively dropping over 50 inches of snow on parts of the state. The weight collapsed hundreds of roofs. The Potomac River froze solid enough to walk on, something it does roughly once a century. Baltimore ground to a halt for 2 weeks, but Maryland's most extreme single temperature swing came on November 11, 1911, when the temperature dropped 66 degrees in 24 hours statewide. Residents who started the day in shirt sleeves ended it fighting a blizzard. Maryland's weather has no loyalty to the season it's supposed to be. Massachusetts. The blizzard of 1978, February 6, 1978, the day Boston stopped. 27.1 inches in 32 hours. But it wasn't the snow that defined the storm. It was the timing. Rush hour traffic was already on the roads when the snow began falling at 2 inches per hour. Thousands of cars were abandoned on Route 128. Some weren't recovered for weeks. The governor banned driving for 5 days. Massachusetts deployed the National Guard on skis. Residents rationed food. The blizzard of 78 is the storm New Englanders still use as the benchmark for everything that comes after. Every storm since is measured against it. Michigan. The Big Blow. November 9, 1913. The Great Lakes, a storm of 1913, produced waves on Lake Superior reaching 35 feet. 12 ships sank in 24 hours. 250 sailors drowned, their bodies washing ashore for weeks. The storm produced barometric pressure drops so severe that meteorologists initially suspected instrument failure. Winds sustained at 70 miles per hour for 11 straight hours over open water. Michigan's most extreme land temperature sits at minus 51 degrees Fahrenheit, recorded at Vanderbilt in 1934. But the 1913 storm proved something the state already knew. The real weather danger in Michigan isn't what falls from the sky. It's what the lakes do when the sky turns. Minnesota. The Armistice Day blizzard. November 11, 1940. It was Armistice Day. A mild morning. Duck hunters had gone out on the Mississippi River in shirt sleeves. By noon, temperatures dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours. The snow hit horizontally. 49 hunters drowned or froze to death. 3 ships sank on Lake Michigan. The storm killed 145 people across the Midwest, many of them outdoors when it struck, because nothing in the weather that morning suggested danger. Minnesota's coldest recorded temperature stands at minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit at Tower in 1996. But no temperature number captures the terror of a Minnesota storm that arrives without warning on a beautiful morning. Mississippi. The super tornado outbreak. February 10th, 2013. Mississippi doesn't appear in most extreme weather discussions. It should. On February 10th, 2013, 15 tornadoes touched down in a single day, including an EF4 that hit Hattiesburg during the peak business hours. The University of Southern Mississippi sustained direct hits across campus. Wind speeds estimated at 170 miles per hour. A church was destroyed during a service. Miraculously, the death toll was low, but the damage was absolute. Mississippi sits at the bottom of the funnel where Gulf moisture, Arkansas cold fronts, and Alabama instability combine. The state doesn't get warning, it just gets impact. Missouri. The Tri-State Tornado. March 18, 1925. Missouri was first. Before the tornado crossed Indiana, before it touched Illinois, it was born in Ellington, Missouri, and it arrived without any of the warning signs people expect. No hail, no lightning. Just a roaring black cloud that appeared out of farmland and consumed Annapolis and Beale entire. Missouri took the first blow of the deadliest tornado in American history, with nearly 700 people ultimately killed across the three-state path. The state has since built one of the most aggressive tornado warning systems in the country. But nothing changes the fact that in 1925, Missouri was where the monster was born. Montana, the Great Cut Bank Cold Snap. January 1954. On January 15, 1954, the temperature in Cut Bank, Montana dropped from 44 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 56 degrees Fahrenheit in a single day. A swing of 100 degrees in 24 hours. The most extreme single-day temperature change ever recorded in U.S. history. Livestock that had been grazing in mild weather froze in fields by nightfall. Ranchers who left home in jacket weather returned to find their pipes burst and windows cracked from thermal shock. Montana regularly records the fastest temperature drops in the nation. The Rocky Mountains force Arctic air masses to accelerate as they descend. The result is weather that changes faster than any warning system can track. Nebraska, the Children's Blizzard. January 12, 1888. In Nebraska, January 12, 1888, is still called the School Children's Storm. The morning was warm enough that hundreds of children walked to school without coats. By mid-afternoon, a blue norther arrived without warning. Temperature dropped 50 degrees in minutes. Blizzard conditions reduced visibility to zero. Children who stepped outside at dismissal were lost within feet of the door. Over 200 people died statewide, including dozens of school children found frozen in fields within sight of their homes. Nebraska's most heartbreaking weather disaster wasn't a hurricane or a tornado. It was a beautiful Wednesday morning that turned into something else entirely. Nevada, the Reno heat record, July 2021. On July 11, 2021, Reno hit 108 degrees Fahrenheit, shattering records that had stood since the 1930s. The heat dome that baked the western U.S. that summer pushed temperatures so far above the historical norm that meteorologists described it as an event with no modern equivalent. But Nevada's all-time extreme belongs to Laughlin on June 29, 1994, which recorded 125 degrees Fahrenheit. In a state that markets itself around its desert mystique, even locals were unprepared. Cooling centers overwhelmed. Power grids strained to breaking point. In Nevada, the House always wins. In July 2021, so did the heat. New Hampshire, the Mount Washington wind record. April 12, 1934. 231 miles per hour. Recorded at the summit of Mount Washington on April 12, 1934. For 62 years, it was the highest surface wind speed ever measured anywhere on Earth. The observatory crew that recorded it had to army crawl across the observation deck to reach instruments. The wind stripped the paint off the building on the windward side. Equipment designed to withstand 150 miles per hour bent at the mountings. Mount Washington's peak sits at the intersection of three major storm tracks, a meteorological collision point that can produce hurricane-force winds 110 days per year. The record stood until the 1996 Australian cyclone. New Hampshire's mountain is still the windiest place in the Eastern Hemisphere. New Jersey, the Great Atlantic Hurricane. September 1944. While New Jersey's worst modern disaster is Hurricane Sandy in 2012, with its record 13.7-foot surge at Battery Park, the Great Atlantic Hurricane of 1944 arrived during the height of World War II. Wartime censorship suppressed weather data to prevent the information from helping enemy submarines, meaning civilians had almost no warning. The storm killed 390 people along the eastern seaboard. Atlantic City's boardwalk was destroyed. New Jersey's coastline reshaped in hours. Sandy got the headlines. The 1944 storm happened in darkness by design, while the country was focused elsewhere. New Mexico. The Dust Bowl. 1930s. Black Sunday, April 14th, 1935, produced a dust wall 8,000 feet high that turned afternoon into midnight across eastern New Mexico. Dust collected in rooms through sealed windows. Cattle suffocated. Children developed dust pneumonia, a condition that didn't exist before the 1930s. The topsoil that blew off the Great Plains represented thousands of years of accumulated earth, gone in one decade of drought and poor farming practice. New Mexico's all-time heat record of 122 degrees Fahrenheit was set at Waste Isolation Pilot Plant on June 27, 1994. But no number captures the suffocation of an entire landscape the way the Dust Bowl photos do. The sky didn't fall in New Mexico. The ground did. New York. The blizzard of 1888. The Great Blizzard of 1888 buried New York City under 22 inches of snow, with drifts reaching 50 feet in some streets. 50 feet! Elevated railway cars were entombed in snow with passengers still inside. 200 ships sank along the coast in the same storm. 400 people died. The disaster directly triggered the construction of the New York City subway, built underground so it could never be stopped by weather again. New York's worst modern storm, Hurricane Sandy in 2012, flooded the subway anyway. The storm that inspired the solution, and the storm that defeated it, bookending 125 years of New York weather history. North Carolina. Hurricane Floyd, September 1999. Floyd made landfall as a Category 2, which sounds manageable. Then it stalled over North Carolina and rained, and rained, and rained. 19 inches fell in some areas over 48 hours. The Tar, News, and Roanoke rivers all broke records simultaneously. 7,000 hog farm lagoons overflowed into floodwaters, creating a toxic soup that contaminated an entire coastal region. 52 people died, $6 billion in damage. It wasn't the wind. Floyd killed North Carolina with patience. Sitting over the state like something that refused to leave, wringing itself out on everything below. North Dakota, the Armistice Day blizzard, November 1940. North Dakota holds the state record for lowest temperature at minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit at Partial in 1936, during the coldest winter ever recorded in American history. But the defining North Dakota weather event is the blizzard of 1966, which produced sustained winds of 75 miles per hour and dropped 35 inches of snow in the western part of the state. Cattle losses numbered in the tens of thousands. Ranch hands who stepped outside to check on livestock were found dead 50 yards from their own doors. North Dakota's weather doesn't just challenge survival, it tests the belief that survival is possible. Ohio, the Xenia tornado, April 3, 1974. Xenia, Ohio was hit by an F5 tornado on April 3, 1974, during the super outbreak, the largest tornado outbreak ever recorded. The Xenia twister was half a mile wide, killing 34 people and destroying 1,000 homes in under 10 minutes. A school bus was thrown into the high school gymnasium. An entire neighborhood was removed from the map with such precision that foundations remained intact, while everything above them disappeared. Ohio experienced 14 tornadoes in that single day, as part of a 148 tornado event across 13 states. Xenia has since been hit by tornadoes 3 more times. The town rebuilt every time. The storms keep finding it. Oklahoma, the Moore tornado, May 20th, 2013, 2 miles wide, 210 miles per hour winds, 17 miles on the ground. The EF5 Moore tornado of 2013 hit a city that had already been hit by an F5 in 1999 in almost exactly the same path. It destroyed 2 elementary schools, killing 7 children at one of them. The storm produced so much debris, lofted so high, that the NWS Doppler radar recorded the debris ball as a separate storm signature. Oklahoma's history with extreme tornadoes is unmatched on Earth. The Moore area has now been struck by significant tornadoes 9 times since 1893. At some point, the statistics stop being science and start being something harder to explain. Oregon, the Columbus Day storm, October 12, 1962. The Columbus Day storm remains the most powerful extratropical cyclone to ever hit the contiguous United States. Peak winds of 179 miles per hour on the coast. 116 miles per hour in Portland. Sustained hurricane force winds for 6 hours across an area 1,000 miles long. A quarter of all timber in Oregon was blown down in a single afternoon. Power lines across the Pacific Northwest failed simultaneously. 46 people died. The storm moved so fast that official warnings came after it had already hit. Oregon's worst weather event wasn't a hurricane and wasn't a blizzard. It was a storm that didn't fit any category humans had prepared for. Pennsylvania. The Johnstown Flood. May 31st, 1889. Pennsylvania's deadliest weather event was a flood triggered by a negligently maintained dam. But it was 6 to 10 inches of rain in 24 hours that turned that negligence fatal. The South Fork Dam failed and sent 20 million tons of water down the Conemaugh Valley. Johnstown was buried under 30 feet of water in minutes. 2,209 people died. Debris piled up 40 feet high at a stone railroad bridge and caught fire, burning people who had survived the flood itself. No storm in Pennsylvania history has killed more people. The rain was extreme. The human failure was worse. Rhode Island. The hurricane of 1938. Rhode Island is the smallest state. The 1938 New England hurricane may have hit it the hardest of any. Providence flooded under 13 feet of water, with no warning. A storm surge that swept entire blocks of the downtown waterfront into the Providence River. 262 Rhode Islanders died. The devastation was so complete that some coastal communities were simply abandoned, rather than rebuilt. The state has never experienced a meteorological event before or since that matched September 21st, 1938, for sheer destructive speed. In Rhode Island, the sea is never far away. In 1938, the sea decided that wasn't far enough. South Carolina. Hurricane Hugo. September 22nd, 1989. Hugo made landfall at Sullivan's Island as a Category 4 with a storm surge of 20 feet. McClellanville, a small fishing town, was inundated so fast that residents who sought shelter in a civic center had to stand on pew backs as the water rose to the ceiling. They survived by inches. The Francis Marion National Forest lost 70% of its trees. Hugo tore a swath of destruction 100 miles inland, still a Category 1 when it hit Charlotte, North Carolina the following day. $10 billion in damage. South Carolina had seen hurricanes. Hugo made them rethink what the word meant. South Dakota. The schoolhouse blizzard. January 12, 1888. South Dakota shares the horror of the children's blizzard with Nebraska, but in South Dakota, it hit harder. The cold front dropped temperatures from plus 50 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit in hours across the territory. The state recorded 112 miles per hour wind gusts in the open prairie, turning frozen snow crystals into sandblasting agents that stripped exposed skin in minutes. Dakota Territory had 35 deaths attributed to children caught outside during school dismissal. The storm fundamentally changed how the region thought about weather preparedness, directly leading to the first organized school weather closure systems in American history. Tennessee. The Great Appalachian Storm. November 1950. In November 1950, a storm system dropped 61 inches of snow on the Great Smoky Mountains and sent record flooding through the Tennessee Valley simultaneously. It killed 335 people across the eastern U.S. in 72 hours. But Tennessee's most surreal weather event was the tornado outbreak of April 27, 2011, which saw 34 tornadoes touch down statewide on the same afternoon as Alabama's catastrophe. In Philadelphia, Tennessee, residents survived an EF4 by taking shelter in a concrete-reinforced church, later emerging to find the entire surrounding neighborhood gone. Their building stood alone on a block of bare foundations. Texas. The Galveston Hurricane. September 8, 1900. The deadliest natural disaster in American history. A Category 4 hurricane hit Galveston Island, Texas, with a storm surge of 15 feet on an island that averaged 8 feet above sea level. At least 8,000 people died, possibly twice that many. Bodies were so numerous that burial was impossible, and the city resorted to loading them onto barges and dumping them at sea. When the bodies washed back ashore, the city burned them in the streets. The storm erased a thriving metropolis that had been considered a major American city. Galveston never fully recovered. Texas has since experienced larger storms. Nothing has ever come close to the death count of 1900. Utah, the Great Salt Lake Snowstorm, October 1984. In October 1984, a series of lake-effect storms dumped 105 inches of snow on the Wasatch Mountains in a single month. Ski resorts recorded snow depths that buried chairlift poles. But Utah's temperature extreme sits at the other end of the scale. St. George recorded 117 degrees Fahrenheit on July 5, 1985, the hottest temperature ever measured in the state. A heat that warped asphalt on roads not designed for that range. Utah's climate is defined by its contradictions. Snowpack that supplies water to 30 million people sitting above desert valleys that bake in triple-digit heat. The extremes don't cancel each other out. They coexist. Vermont, the flood of 1927. In November 1927, 3 days of rain fell on soil that was already frozen, with no absorption possible. The Winooski River rose 14 feet above flood stage. Bridges across the state were swept away at a rate of 1 per hour. 84 Vermonters died. Over 1,200 bridges destroyed. The governor traveled the state by rowboat. The disaster reshaped Vermont's entire economy and infrastructure, directly driving the construction of federal flood control reservoirs across New England. Vermont's 2011 repeat, Hurricane Irene, flooded entire towns and cut off 13 communities by road, but even Irene didn't match 1927. Vermont measures every flood against one it has never stopped remembering. Virginia. The Ash Wednesday Storm, March 7, 1962. The Ash Wednesday storm wasn't a hurricane or a blizzard. It was a nor'easter that parked itself offshore for 5 days and simply refused to leave. It hit Virginia Beach at high tide, 5 times. The repeated assault dismantled the boardwalk piece by piece across 5 tidal cycles. 40 blocks of beachfront property destroyed. Virginia's barrier islands were reshaped permanently, some of them shifting position by hundreds of feet. The storm killed 40 Virginians and cost $500 million in 1962 dollars. Virginia's worst weather disaster wasn't a single catastrophic moment. It was 5 days of relentless, methodical destruction. Washington, the Columbus Day Storm, October 12, 1962. Washington felt the same storm as Oregon, but Washington's defining weather nightmare is the Wellington Avalanche of March 1, 1910. 96 people died when a 6-day blizzard deposited so much snow on the Cascades that a slab the length of a football field broke loose and buried 2 trains in seconds. The Great Northern Railway cars were swept 100 feet down into the canyon. Rescuers reached survivors only to find more bodies. The disaster ended passenger trains on that mountain route and ultimately forced the construction of the Cascade Tunnel, the longest railroad bore in America. Washington's worst weather event wasn't wind or rain. It was silence. Then a roar. Then nothing. West Virginia. The Buffalo Creek Flood, February 26, 1972. West Virginia's worst weather disaster was powered by rain, coal, and negligence. 3 days of heavy rain filled an impoundment dam of coal slurry to breaking point. When it failed, a 30-foot wall of black water, not clean floodwater, but toxic coal waste, hit the Buffalo Creek Valley at 30 miles per hour. 125 people died, 500 homes destroyed, 4,000 left homeless in a mountain hollow with no escape routes. The state record cold, minus 37 degrees Fahrenheit at Lewisburg in 1917, and record heat of 112 degrees Fahrenheit at Martinsburg in 1936. Bookend a century of extremes. But no number in West Virginia's weather history carries the weight of February 26, 1972. Wisconsin, the Peshtigo firestorm, October 8, 1871. The same night the Great Chicago Fire captured the world's attention, the Peshtigo fire in Wisconsin killed 5 times more people. And nobody noticed. The fire was created by drought-fueled weather conditions so extreme that the firestorm generated its own tornado-force winds over 100 miles per hour, feeding on itself. 2,500 people died, possibly more. The fire burned so hot that sand turned to glass. Trees were incinerated so fast they left no ash. Wisconsin's deadliest weather event is still relatively unknown because it was overshadowed by a smaller fire in a more famous city. History's cruelest editorial decision. Wyoming, the wind that never stops. Every day. Wyoming doesn't have a single signature disaster, it has a permanent condition. Cheyenne averages 12.9 miles per hour sustained wind every day of the year, the windiest city in the nation. The state record gust is 108 miles per hour at Laramie in 1962. Travelers have been stranded on the I-80 by wind alone, with no snow, no ice, just air moving fast enough to flip semi-trucks onto their sides. The extreme cold record, minus 66 degrees Fahrenheit at Riverside in 1933, is one of the lowest in the lower 48. Wyoming doesn't attack with single events. It wears you down, constantly. A state where the wind is less a weather phenomenon and more a geological feature, something the land simply does.